Why was she the only one awake when the storm began? The rest of the unit slept in their bunks, shoulders pressed close in the cramped shelter, rifles stacked at the door like weary bones. But she, Sarah Martinez, sat alone near the open hatch, the rain slicing sideways across the night, her hands wrapped around a rifle that had been cleaned 3 times already. She didn't flinch when the thunder rolled. She didn't even blink. The truth was, storms didn't scare her. Silence did. Lightning cut the sky, and for a moment she saw herself reflected in the glass of her scope, a pale face streaked with sweat and rain. 29 years old, but she felt older, heavier, carved hollow by long deployments and longer regrets. The others thought she was calm, composed, unshakable. They didn't know her heart carried the weight of every name she'd failed to forget. Behind her, one of the men stirred, muttered something in a dream. She glanced back, just enough to see his hand twitch, reaching for someone who wasn't there. Then he settled again. She looked away. It was easier that way. The storm pressed harder against the mountain, rattling the steel plates of their outpost. Somewhere below, through sheets of rain and black terrain, an enemy convoy had gone to ground. Intelligence said they were waiting for the weather to mask movement. That meant tonight or tomorrow. It was her job to see them first. Her job to strike before they reached the villages, before the screaming began again. And yet she waited. Because the worst part wasn't the trigger pull. It was the waiting, the sitting alone with thoughts she couldn't voice, knowing the others depended on her. Knowing that if she blinked, if she doubted, if she let the storm swallow her focus, people would die. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Her headset hissed. A voice broke through, low and crackling. "Martinez, you awake?" She pressed a finger to her earpiece. Always. It was Captain Rhodes. He was somewhere in the rear quarters, probably sitting over his maps, chain-smoking even though he swore he'd quit. He'd been her co for 3 deployments. He knew her better than most, which wasn't saying much. "You see anything?" he asked. She scanned the darkness again, the scope glowing faint green in the storm. Nothing but rain. A pause, then softer. "You need rest." She almost laughed, almost. "Storm won't let me." He didn't argue, he never did. Maybe he understood. Maybe he was just too tired to push. "Wake Simmons in an hour. You can't keep watch all night." "I'll manage." The line clicked dead. She lowered the rifle, rested her cheek against the cold metal stock. The storm whispered like 1,000 hidden voices. She wondered if her mother was awake now, halfway across the world, waiting for a call that never came. Her mother had begged her to quit. After the last deployment, after the hospital stay, after the funeral of someone she wouldn't name aloud. "You've done enough, Sarah. Please, come home." But she hadn't. Because she couldn't explain what home even was anymore. Another crash of thunder shook the hillside and she closed her eyes, just for a second, just long enough to hear it, the sound beneath the storm. A hollow metallic grind, too sharp, too real. She snapped the scope back up, breath caught. There, through the sheets of rain, a shape moving against the hillside, not natural, not storm. Her pulse steadied instead of racing. She breathed once slow, adjusted the dial. Rain smeared across the lens, but she saw it clearly now. A truck crawling up the valley. No lights. No sound but the churn of wheels in mud. Her finger rested on the trigger guard. Not yet. She reached for the radio, froze. Because another truck appeared behind it, and then another. Her chest tightened. This wasn't a scouting patrol. This was the convoy, early, hidden by the storm. "Captain," she whispered into the mic. "Movement, eastern approach, 3 trucks minimum." The radio hissed. Then Rhodes, "Copy, are you sure?" She wanted to scream at him, but she didn't. She never raised her voice. "I'm sure." A long silence. Then, "Hold position, don't fire until they're closer." She bit her lip. "They're heading straight for us." "Orders, Martinez." She lowered her scope, pressed her forehead to the rifle. Orders, always orders, but if she waited too long. She thought of the villages again. The children she'd seen last time, mud-streaked, eyes wide, clutching empty bowls. The men with their throats cut open in ditches. The women who had begged her to stay, just stay one more night because maybe it would have changed something. Her chest ached. She pulled the scope back up, exhaled slow. "Copy," she said finally. And so she waited. The storm beat harder. The trucks crawled closer. She could almost smell the diesel through the rain. She could almost see the faces in the cab, shadows lit by lightning. Her heart thudded, calm, controlled, but thudding still. One of the men behind her stirred again. Simmons. He mumbled something, turned on his side. He would wake soon, she could call him, share the weight. But she didn't. Because this was hers. A flash of lightning illuminated the convoy fully, 6 trucks now, armored heavy, and at the front mounted weapons. She sucked in air. "Captain, confirmed 6 vehicles, heavy, recommend immediate strike." Rhodes' voice came back harder now. "Negative, wait." Her grip tightened. Wait, always listen, always swallow the instinct. But if she waited? The first truck crested the ridge, headed directly toward the pass that led to the villages. Her finger found the trigger. Her lips moved in a whisper no one could hear. "Forgive me." And then the shot broke the storm. The recoil slammed her shoulder, sharp, familiar. The first driver's head snapped back, blood spraying the windshield. The truck veered, skidding sideways in the mud. Chaos exploded as the others braked, soldiers leaping from the backs, shouting in the storm. Behind her, Simmons jerked awake. "What the?" She didn't look at him. She chambered the next round, sighted the next man, pulled again. Each shot cracked like thunder layered into thunder. Each one tore open a choice she could never undo. Within seconds, the hillside erupted in fire. Muzzle flashes spat from the trucks, bullets whining off the steel of their outpost. Someone shouted orders, boots thudding on the floor. She kept firing, calm, cold, steady. Inside, her chest burned. Because she knew what she had just done. She had disobeyed. And the storm was only beginning. What happens when obedience collides with conscience? Sarah knew the answer the moment the first body dropped in the mud. The storm swallowed the hillside in chaos, men shouting in a language half hidden by the rain, rifles spitting fire into the night. Her scope flared with green silhouettes as she picked targets, fast, efficient, mechanical. Each shot hammered her shoulder, each breath reset her aim. She became a rhythm, a pattern inside the storm. But every rhythm carries a cost. Behind her, Simmons scrambled to his feet, half asleep, rifle clutched. "What the hell, Martinez? We weren't greenlit." She didn't answer, she didn't have to. The truth roared from the muzzle. More boots thundered in the outpost, soldiers rushing for defensive positions. The radio hissed alive, Rhodes' voice sharp with anger. "Martinez, stand down, that's an order." She pressed the mic. "Too late, sir, they're already engaged." A pause, pure fury wrapped in silence. Then, "Hold them off, we'll discuss this after." She almost smiled at the absurdity. After, as if there was ever an after. The trucks convulsed under fire, men spilling into ditches, dragging heavy crates. She tracked one, aimed at the lock of the crate itself. Fired. The box erupted, spilling metal cylinders across the mud, mortars, heavy ones. Her stomach turned cold. If they'd reached the villages. No, she didn't let the thought finish. She shot the man bending to retrieve one. Around her, the unit roared to life. Simmons knelt beside her, rifle braced. Carter and Diaz sprinted past with machine guns, sliding into sandbags at the perimeter. The small outpost became teeth in the storm, chewing the convoy to pieces. Still, they were outnumbered. Sarah kept firing until her magazine clicked empty. She reloaded in silence, rain streaming down her face. Her hands moved without thought, polished by years, by scars. But inside, her chest coiled tight. Because she knew Rhodes was right, she hadn't waited. She hadn't obeyed, and if this went wrong, if they all died here in the mud, it would be on her. "Contact left," Simmons shouted, dragging her back to the moment. She swiveled, spotted 3 figures advancing along the ridge, dark shapes against lightning. She adjusted her scope, steadied, squeezed. One dropped. Another froze, turned to run. She cut him down before the third scrambled back into cover. Her heart slowed, her breath controlled. Calm, always calm. But then she heard it. A scream. She froze. The sound was raw, close. She dropped the scope, turned. Diaz was on the ground near the sandbags, clutching his leg. Blood poured through his fingers, mixing with rain. Carter dragged him back, shouting for a medic. Sarah's throat tightened. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Not again. Her hands trembled as she recentered the scope, eyes blurring. She wiped them hard, forced herself back into clarity. One breath, one shot, one moment at a time. Because she couldn't think about the last time, about the body she hadn't saved, about the silence that followed her home and never left. The firefight dragged on, minutes blurred. The trucks burned, black smoke twisting into storm clouds. Finally, the remaining enemy broke, retreating into the valley, shadows swallowed by rain. The hillside fell quiet but for the crackle of flames and the groans of the wounded. Sarah lowered the rifle, exhaling long. Her shoulder throbbed, her ears rang, her chest ached with something heavier than exhaustion. The battle was over, for now. But the storm inside her had only sharpened. She stood slowly, stretching her cramped legs, and turned. The outpost was chaos, medics bent over Diaz, men hauling ammunition, Rhodes barking orders with a cigarette clenched in his teeth. His eyes found hers across the room, hard as stone. She looked away first. Simmons approached, rain dripping from his helmet. He wasn't angry, not like Rhodes. He was scared. "Why'd you do it, Sarah?" His voice cracked. "We could have waited. Reinforcements were coming tomorrow." She met his eyes steady. "And if tomorrow was too late?" He shook his head, muttered something she couldn't hear, and walked off. She knew what he was thinking. She knew what they were all thinking. She was reckless. She was dangerous. She was the reason Diaz might lose his leg tonight. But none of them had seen what she'd seen. None of them had carried the memory that haunted her. She crouched, resting her rifle across her knees, staring into the rain. 2 years ago, different country, different storm. She had obeyed then. She had waited just like the book demanded. Waited for clearance, for confirmation, for orders that came minutes too late. By the time they'd moved, the convoy had already hit the village. She remembered the smoke, the children pulled from burning homes, the silence of her own rifle clutched in hands that shook with uselessness. And one face, small, ash-streaked, eyes too wide, a girl clutching a doll with half its head burned away. Sarah had met those eyes, and she had known obeying didn't absolve you, waiting didn't save anyone. That night had carved her open, hollowed her out, and she had sworn never again. Now, with Diaz screaming on the floor and Rhodes, glare burning into her, she wondered if her vow had damned them all. The storm eased toward dawn. The rain slowed, mist curling across the valley like smoke from a dying fire. Inside the outpost, men slumped against walls, exhausted. The medics had stabilized Diaz, though his leg was torn badly. Rhodes sat at a table with maps spread before him, cigarette butts piled in a tin can. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. Finally he stood, his voice carried, "Martinez with me." The room went silent. She rose slowly, rifle slung, and followed him into the narrow briefing room. The door shut behind them, muting the storm. Rhodes didn't sit. He paced once, twice, then turned on her. "What the hell were you thinking?" She stood straight, rain dripping from her uniform. "I was thinking they'd reach the villages." "You don't get to think, you get to follow orders." His hand slammed the table, maps shuddering. "You risked everyone out there. Diaz could die because of you." Her chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. And if I hadn't pulled that trigger, 6 trucks full of mortars would be rolling through villages right now. How many would die then? His eyes narrowed. You don't get to play God. Her lips trembled, but she steadied them. Someone has to. For a moment's silence, only their breath heavy colliding. Rhodes exhaled smoke. His anger didn't vanish, but something behind his eyes shifted. Weariness. Pain. He rubbed his forehead, muttering, "You're gonna get yourself court-martialed." She said nothing. Because maybe she already knew. Because maybe she didn't care. He studied her for a long time, then finally shook his head. "Get some rest. We'll decide what comes next at dawn." She turned to leave, hand on the door. But before she opened it, she spoke quietly, almost to herself. "Sir, sometimes waiting costs more lives than it saves." The door creaked open. She stepped back into the dim room where the others sat in silence, eyes following her. She walked past them, past Simmons' worried stare, past Diaz groaning softly under morphine. She didn't meet their eyes. Because she knew what they saw now. Not a calm, unshakable sniper, but a storm walking on 2 legs. Why was everyone so quiet at breakfast? Sarah sat at the long metal table, tin cup of coffee cooling in her hands, the storm outside thinning into gray drizzle. Around her, the others chewed in silence. No jokes, no chatter, just the scrape of spoons against bowls and the occasional cough. She didn't need to ask why. She felt their stares even when they didn't look at her. Simmons sat 2 seats down, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on his oatmeal. Carter leaned back, arms crossed, chewing slow as if the taste didn't matter. Diaz wasn't there. He was in the med tent, doped on morphine, legs swaddled in bloody bandages. Rhodes entered last. He didn't sit. He scanned the room with eyes hard as stone, then said, "We're holding position until evac for Diaz. Command wants a debrief by nightfall. Until then, keep watch, stay sharp." And his gaze cut directly at Sarah. "No one pulls a trigger unless cleared." A few men glanced at her, quick, like flinches. She kept her face blank, fingers wrapped around her cup. Rhodes left. Silence pressed down again. She took a sip of cold coffee, bitter, burned. She wanted to say something, explain, but her throat locked. What could she say? That she saw ghosts in every storm, that waiting had cost her more than orders ever could. No, they wouldn't understand. Simmons finally broke it. "Diaz asked for you last night." His voice was low, almost accusing. Her chest tightened. "Why?" "Wanted to know why you didn't wait." Simmons set down his spoon, his hand trembling slightly. "Wanted to know why his leg is gone, but the villagers you keep talking about aren't even here." She swallowed hard. "Tell him I'll come by later." Simmons didn't nod, didn't speak. He just stood, left his half-eaten bowl, and walked out. She sat alone at the table, surrounded by the sound of rain dripping from the roof. The storm outside had passed, the one inside hadn't. By midday the valley lay quiet. Mist curled over charred wrecks of trucks still smoldering on the hillside. Black smoke smeared the sky, a marker visible for miles. The enemy would come back. They always did. Sarah stood on the watchtower, rifle slung, eyes scanning the ridges. Every shadow felt heavier now, every flicker of movement a threat. Her thoughts drifted, unwillingly, back to Diaz. His scream had pierced her last night, cutting through the calm she clung to. She had seen too many men bleed, but his pain was different, because it was tied to her decision. A decision she couldn't undo. The radio crackled on her shoulder. Rhodes' voice again. "Martinez, report." "Valley's clear, no movement." A pause, and inside your head. Her jaw clenched. She didn't answer. "You're not bulletproof," he said, softer now. "Don't act like you are." Static swallowed the line before she could reply. She leaned on the rail, staring into the mist. The mountains stretched endless, sharp teeth biting into clouds. She wondered how many bodies lay hidden in those ridges, how many names lost to mud and silence. Her fingers brushed the scar along her left wrist, faint under the glove, a reminder of the night she almost didn't come back. She had promised herself, promised her mother, that she wouldn't let it happen again. But promises in war were paper in rain. Later, when the sun dipped low and the mist burned orange, she forced herself into the med tent. Diaz lay pale under a blanket, leg heavily bandaged, sweat beading on his brow. His eyes flicked to her as she entered. For a moment silence stretched, then he rasped why. She pulled up a stool, sat beside him, her hands folded tight in her lap. "Because waiting last time cost lives," she said softly, "and I couldn't," her throat caught. "I couldn't let it happen again." His lips twisted, "And my leg." She flinched. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her a long moment, then closed his eyes. "Sorry doesn't walk me home." Her chest cracked. She wanted to reach for his hand but didn't. She just sat there until his breathing steadied, until sleep took him. Then she left the tent, heart heavier than when she'd entered. Night fell, the outpost dimmed, only lanterns flickering against walls. Rhodes called them into the briefing room. A laptop glowed on the table, command waiting on the other end. The debrief was cold, clinical. Rhodes spoke first, his voice even. "Enemy convoy engaged last night. 6 vehicles destroyed, mortars recovered, 1 wounded on our side." The officer on the screen nodded. "Confirmed, good work." Sarah's stomach turned. Good work. 2 words to cover blood and screams and choices that carved scars. Then Rhodes added, "Engagement was initiated prematurely, without clearance." The officer's eyes sharpened. "Who fired?" Silence. The men glanced at her, then back at the screen. Sarah stepped forward, voice steady. "I did." The officer studied her, unreadable. "Why?" She hesitated. Her chest burned with everything she wanted to say, the children, the burned doll, the silence of waiting. But she only said, "Because if I hadn't, they'd be in the villages by now." The officer exhaled, leaned back. "Result speaks for itself, but disobedience won't be ignored. Martinez, you'll be reviewed when rotation ends. Until then, Rhodes, keep her under command." The call ended. Rhodes shut the laptop hard. He didn't look at her. The men filed out, muttering. She stood alone in the empty room, the hum of the laptop fan fading. Reviewed. That meant paperwork, hearings, judgment from people who'd never felt the storm, never looked into a scope at night with a village behind you. She clenched her fists. Maybe they'd strip her rifle, maybe they'd send her home. But none of that mattered, because something else had shifted. When the call ended, she had glimpsed Rhodes' hand shaking as he closed the laptop. She had never seen him shake. Something was wrong. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat on her bunk, boots still on, listening to the slow drip of rain outside. The men around her snored, restless. Diaz groaned in his sleep. She pulled the small notebook from her pack, the one she never showed anyone. Inside were names, not official lists. Her lists, people she'd lost, people she'd promised not to forget. She turned the pages slowly, fingers brushing faded ink. Some names she could barely remember the faces for, others burned fresh in her mind. She added one more word under the last entry, not a name, just Diaz. Then she closed the book, tucked it back into her pack. A sound outside drew her attention, a crunch of gravel, deliberate. She stood, rifle in hand, and moved silently to the hatch. The drizzle had stopped. The valley was shrouded in fog, moonlight bleeding through thin clouds. She scanned the perimeter. Nothing. And yet her gut tightened. She lifted her rifle, peered through the scope, slowly swept the ridges. There a flicker, a figure moving in the fog, too far to ID, too slow for wildlife. Her chest tightened. She almost raised the radio, almost called it in. But something made her pause. The figure didn't move like a soldier, no weapon raised, just a slow, stumbling walk along the ridge. She adjusted focus, the fog thinned. A child. Barefoot, clothes torn, a small figure moving aimlessly along the rocks. Her breath caught. Her finger froze on the trigger, because she knew that silhouette. The doll, the burned doll. The same child she'd seen years ago. Her heart pounded. She blinked. The ridge was empty. Just fog curling through stone. Her hands shook as she lowered the rifle. And she whispered to the night, "What are you doing to me?" Why did her hands keep shaking, even when the night was calm? Sarah stared at them in the dim lantern light of the barracks, fingers curled, trembling faintly as if the storm hadn't left her bones. She flexed them slowly, forcing control, but the tremor stayed. She wasn't afraid of battle. She wasn't afraid of pain. What she feared was the silence after. Across the room, Carter was whispering to Simmons, words too low to catch, but Sarah didn't need to hear them. She knew. She was the reason Diaz was on a cot. She was the reason command had tightened its eyes on them. She was the reason they'd all spent the day watching the ridges with a kind of brittle tension, waiting for retaliation. She lay back on her bunk, boots still on, rifle within reach. Sleep wouldn't come. It never did after a firefight, not fully. Her mind replayed each shot, each scream, each choice. And then the ridge, the child. She closed her eyes, saw again the small figure in torn clothes, the doll dangling from a burned arm. But that had been 2 years ago, thousands of miles away. That girl couldn't be here. Could she? Her chest rose sharp, breath caught. No, it was memory. It had to be. But what if it was? She rolled onto her side, pressing her hands to her face. Her heart wouldn't slow. The silence stretched heavy. Finally, she sat up, grabbed her rifle, and stepped into the cold air outside. The fog clung to the valley, thick as smoke. Lanterns flickered along the perimeter. A few men stood watch, shadows behind sandbags, their shoulders slumped from exhaustion. Sarah walked past them without a word, climbing the narrow steps of the watchtower. Up here, the mist felt endless, swallowing the mountains whole. She set the rifle on the rail, lifted the scope, scanned. Slowly, carefully. At first, nothing. Just fog, broken rocks, burned trucks smoldering faintly. But then, movement again. Her pulse spiked. She focused, breath held. Not a child this time, not a ghost. Figures, several. Moving low through the fog, weapons cradled, their silhouettes blending into the gray. Her stomach knotted. The enemy was probing back already. She pressed the radio. "Captain, movement in the valley, multiple." Static, then Rhodes' weary voice. "Hold position, don't fire, could be scouts." Her jaw clenched. Don't fire, always don't fire, always wait until it's too late. She stayed in the scope, tracking. 5 figures now, 6, sliding closer to the wrecked trucks. And then one of them bent down, pried open a charred crate, pulled something free. Her throat tightened, another mortar tube. They hadn't destroyed them all. "Captain," she said, sharper now, "they're pulling weapons from the wreckage." A pause, hold, we'll decide when. The man in her scope lifted the mortar tube, turning toward the ridge. Her finger moved to the trigger. "Orders, Martinez," Rhodes barked in her ear. "Stand down." Her heart hammered, her breath shallow. If she waited, they'd be armed within seconds. If she fired, she'd break command again. Her hands trembled. The man raised the tube, shouted something to the others. Sarah whispered again to no one, "Forgive me." And she pulled. The man crumpled. The mortar clattered to the rocks. The others scattered, ducking into fog, rifles flashing. Gunfire cracked across the valley. Bullets hissed overhead, smacking into sandbags below. Shouts erupted as the unit scrambled awake. Sarah reloaded, fired again, cutting down another shadow. The hillside bloomed with chaos. "Damn it, Martinez," Rhodes roared in her ear. but his voice was drowned by the thud of return fire, the panicked calls of his men. The outpost roared alive. Carter's machine gun spat through the mist. Simmons shouted ranges. Rhodes barked orders over the din. And Sarah kept shooting, calm, cold, the storm inside her finding release. The firefight dragged minutes into hours. The fog made targets ghosts there then gone. Men cursed, fired, ducked. The air reeked of cordite and mud. When silence finally fell, it wasn't victory that filled the air. It was exhaustion. Bodies lay scattered on the ridge. Smoke curled from burned crates. The survivors had fled back into the fog. The men slumped against walls, catching breath, trading looks sharper than words. And Rhodes stood in the mud, headset dangling, cigarette trembling in his hand. He didn't look at her, not yet. But she knew it was coming. Dawn broke pale and cold. The fog thinned, revealing bodies sprawled like broken shadows across the valley. Birds circled overhead. Sarah sat alone at the edge of the outpost, rifle across her knees. Her hands had steadied again. Calm returned, but it was a fragile calm like glass over fire. Footsteps crunched behind her. Rhodes. He stopped a few feet away, said nothing at first, just smoked, staring into the valley. Finally, you don't listen. Her voice was quiet. If I had, they'd have mortars aimed at us by now. He exhaled long. Maybe, or maybe they were just retrieving scraps. Maybe you killed half a dozen men for nothing. She turned, met his eyes. You don't believe that. He didn't answer. His face was tired, drawn, the lines deeper than yesterday. You're going to burn out, he said finally. Sooner or later the weight will crush you. You can't carry it all. Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him about the child she'd seen in the fog, about the face that haunted her scope, but the words stuck. They would sound like madness. Instead, she whispered, I'm already carrying it. Rhodes shook his head, dropped the cigarette into the mud. Not for long. He walked away. That afternoon, command called again. Rhodes reported the second engagement, voice clipped. The officer on the screen looked displeased. Another unauthorized shot, he asked. Rhodes' jaw flexed. Yes. Sarah stepped forward. Sir, I. The officer cut her off. You'll be relieved of sniper duty pending review, effective immediately. Your weapon will be reassigned. Her chest hollowed. The rifle had been her anchor, her voice when she couldn't speak, her purpose when words failed. Now gone. She stood silent as Rhodes closed the laptop. He didn't look at her. The men didn't either. She walked out of the room slowly, each step heavier than the last. When she reached her bunk, she sat down, hands empty. For the first time in years, she felt naked without the rifle against her shoulder. Her eyes blurred. She pressed her palms hard against them, refusing to let the tears fall. But she couldn't stop the whisper in her chest. What am I without it? That night, unable to sleep, she returned to the watchtower. Unarmed, just her eyes. The valley stretched quiet, silver in moonlight. She leaned on the rail, the wind tugging her damp hair, and thought again of the child in the fog. Was it memory, guilt, or had there really been someone out there? Her gut twisted with the same certainty that had pulled her finger twice before. She didn't know why, she didn't know how. But she believed. The child was real. And if she was, it meant civilians were still caught in this valley. Which meant the storm wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The rifle was gone, but the silence stayed. Sarah sat on her bunk, boots planted firm on the wooden floor, hands clasped so tightly they ached. Around her, the barracks buzzed with tired conversation, the low hiss of boiling coffee, the shuffle of cards. The men carried on as though last night's firefight had already blurred into the fog. But for her, time didn't move. Every second she felt the ghost weight of the rifle on her shoulder. Every second she heard again the crunch of Rhodes' voice, relieved, effective immediately. She had been stripped, not just of a weapon, of identity. A sniper was defined by distance, calm, the steady thread of control between chaos and silence. Without that role, who was she? Her hands trembled again. She rose abruptly, muttering something about air, and stepped outside. The mountains loomed jagged against the dusk, their peaks still holding stubborn streaks of snow. The valley stretched wide below, scarred by smoke and wreckage, the kind of land that carried death in its bones. Sarah wandered to the watchtower, not because she had orders, not because she was needed, but because something pulled her there, something that had nothing to do with command. She climbed the steps, leaned against the rail, and closed her eyes. The wind whispered through the gaps in the planks. And then soft, a voice. Not real couldn't be real. Help! Her eyes snapped open. She scanned the valley, heart hammering. Nothing moved. She pressed her palms to her temples. It's in your head, just in your head. But when she lowered her hands, she saw it again. A flicker in the trees at the base of the ridge. Not a soldier, not a fighter. Small, frail. A child. Her throat closed, the same doll, the same torn clothes. But this time different, more solid, less dream. The figure darted back into the trees. Sarah gripped the rail, knuckles white. She wasn't imagining it, she couldn't be. There were civilians out there. The next morning, a patrol returned ragged, their truck riddled with bullet holes. They carried not just crates of captured ammunition, but a man. A civilian. He was gaunt, face hollow, eyes wide with a terror that never seemed to blink. His hands were bound, but it was clear he wasn't a fighter. The barracks erupted with speculation. Carter swore. Simmons muttered prayers. Even Rhodes stood unusually still. Sarah approached, careful. The man's lips trembled, words spilling in a language she half understood. Broken, desperate. One word cut through clear as glass. Children. Sarah froze. She crouched, meeting his wild eyes. Where? The man gestured weakly toward the ridges. His voice cracked, but the meaning was unmistakable. There were civilians still hiding in the valley. Families, children. Her heart thundered. The child wasn't a ghost, not memory. She was real. That night, Sarah cornered Rhodes in the command tent. You heard him, she said. They're still out there, we can't just sit here. Rhodes rubbed his temples. Our mission is to hold this outpost, not play saviors in the mountains. Her jaw tightened. So we just leave them, let them starve, let the enemy use them as shields. His eyes burned into hers. Don't think I don't care, but I don't have orders to move, and I'm not risking men on a ghost chase. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Ghost. The word cut deeper than he knew. She leaned forward, voice low, steady. I've seen her, a girl, she's alive. Rhodes' expression hardened like a door slamming shut. You're not seeing straight, Martinez. You've been under fire too long. You're projecting. I'm not sending men into the dark because of your guilt. The words hit like a strike to the gut. Guilt, that was what he thought of her. She straightened, trembling. Then I'll go myself. His voice cracked like a whip. You're grounded. You so much as step outside this perimeter without orders, and I'll have you chained to the radio desk. Do you understand me? Her throat worked, but she said nothing. She left the tent before he could see the fury in her eyes. Sleep didn't come. The barracks were heavy with snores and mutters, but Sarah lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling, the whisper still in her ears. Help! She turned the words over, again and again, until they hollowed her chest. Finally, near dawn, she rose, quiet, careful, boots laced without sound. She didn't take a rifle, she wasn't allowed, but she slid a sidearm into her holster, checked the magazine, and pulled on her jacket. The night air bit cold as she slipped past the guards, weaving into the fog. Each step away from the outpost was heavier, but each step closer to the ridge lightened her chest. For once, she wasn't hesitating. The forest swallowed her quickly, its branches skeletal against the moon. She moved slow, careful, ears straining for every crack of twig, every whisper of breath. At first nothing, just wind. Then movement. She froze, hand hovering at her pistol. From the trees a figure emerged. Small, thin. The girl. Her doll clutched tight to her chest, her eyes enormous, hollow, reflecting the faint moonlight. Sarah's heart stuttered. She crouched slowly, raising her hands. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl stared, trembling. Then she lifted her free hand, pointed deeper into the forest. Sarah followed her gaze and saw them. Dozens, maybe more, huddled in the shadows, mothers clutching infants, old men leaning on sticks, children with eyes too old for their faces. Her breath caught. This wasn't just a lost girl. It was an entire pocket of survivors. But the moment broke with a sound. A shout. Voices. Not English. Armed men emerged from the other side of the clearing, rifles raised, barking orders. The civilians froze, pressing back, children crying silently into their mothers' chests. Sarah's heart slammed. She dropped behind a tree, hand gripping the pistol. Her eyes locked on the girl again. The child's eyes begged one word. Help. Sarah's breath shook. One pistol, dozens of civilians, a squad of enemy fighters. And no backup. Her mind raced. If she fired, she'd give herself away instantly. She couldn't win a direct fight. But if she did nothing, the civilians would be marched away, or worse. Her jaw clenched. She thought of Rhodes' voice, ghost chase, guilt. She thought of Diaz on the cot, of Carter's bitter stares. She thought of the weight of her rifle, the one she no longer had. And then she thought of the girl, clutching her doll like it was the last piece of a world already burned. Sarah closed her eyes, took one steady breath, and decided. The first shot cracked through the night. The first shot cracked through the night like lightning. One man dropped instantly, rifle clattering in the mud. The others spun, shouting, spraying wild bursts into the trees. Civilians screamed and dropped flat, clutching their children. Sarah moved before they could pin her down. She ducked, rolled behind another tree, heart hammering so loud she swore the enemy could hear it. She fired again, short, precise. Another soldier staggered, collapsed. Her pistol barked once more, click, empty. Her breath caught. She ejected the magazine, fumbling for a spare. One left, only one. The squad regrouped fast, too fast. Muzzles swept the tree line, their beams slicing through branches. Bark exploded above her head as bullets chewed the wood. Sarah clenched her teeth, reloaded, and pressed her back to the trunk. Think, stay alive. Her eyes flicked toward the civilians. The girl still clutched her doll, wide-eyed, frozen. Mothers shielded infants. Men whispered prayers. Sarah's chest tightened. If she died here, they'd all be taken. Her hand brushed against something cold in the mud. She looked down. A discarded rifle, enemy issue, dropped by the man she'd shot first. She snatched it, checked the chamber, loaded. Her pulse steadied. She rose, sighted, fired. The rifle cracked, heavier than her familiar weapon but deadly all the same. Two more went down, screams, confusion. She shifted, ran low, slid into cover behind a fallen log. The squad shouted orders she couldn't understand, but panic laced their voices now. One of them fired a flare. The clearing lit up in harsh red. Shadows leapt across terrified faces. And Sarah was exposed. Bullets ripped through the log, splinters slashing her cheek. She hit the ground, teeth grit, forcing herself not to cry out. Then footsteps. Close, too close. She rolled, firing blind. The man screamed, dropped at her feet. His rifle clattered inches from her hand. She didn't think. She grabbed it, swung, fired into the advancing line. Bodies fell. The survivors broke, retreating into the forest with shouts of fear. And then silence. Sarah lay there, chest heaving, rain dripping from her hair, ears ringing. Slowly, she pushed herself up. The civilians hadn't moved. Wide, hollow eyes stared at her. Her pistol lay empty in the mud, the stolen rifles heavy in her grip. And then movement. The girl. She stood slowly, clutching the doll. Her lips trembled. One word broke free. "Please." Sarah's breath caught. She lowered the weapon, let it fall into the mud. Her hands shook as she raised them, open, empty. "It's all right," she whispered, voice raw. "You're safe." For a long, shattering second, no one moved. And then the girl stepped forward. One step, two. She stopped in front of Sarah, doll pressed to her chest, and reached out with trembling fingers. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat thick, and gently took her hand. Back at the outpost, Simmons burst into Rhodes' quarters. "She's gone." Rhodes looked up from his map, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, gone?" "Martinez, her bunk's empty, sidearm missing, she's not on the perimeter." Carter cursed from the doorway. "Told you she'd snap, storm broke her." Rhodes stood slowly, jaw tight. "Where?" Simmons hesitated. "Tracks head east, toward the ridge." Silence stretched. Everyone knew what was east. Rhodes closed his eyes briefly. He'd forbidden her, grounded her, called her unstable. And yet she'd gone. Not for herself, he knew that much. For them, the civilians. He felt it in his gut. Carter muttered again. "Let her go. She wants to die, let her. Better than dragging us into her mess." Simmons shot him a glare. "She saved our skins more than once. You'd be cold in a ditch if it weren't for her trigger." "Yeah, and Diaz wouldn't be in a cot if she hadn't started this whole mess." Rhodes slammed his fist against the table. The room went silent. "She's one of ours," he said, low, hard. "We don't leave our own." Carter shook his head. "You'll risk the whole unit for one soldier." Rhodes' eyes burned. "For Martinez, I'd risk more." Sarah led them slowly, carefully through the trees. The civilians shuffled like ghosts, too weak to hurry, too terrified to trust. But they followed her, because she carried something in her eyes they hadn't seen in months. A promise. The little girl clung to her hand, silent but steady. Every branch snap made Sarah's pulse spike, every shadow a threat. She knew more would come. The squad she scattered would regroup, and next time she might not survive. But she kept walking. Step by step, deeper into the night. She wasn't leading them to safety yet, only away from death. She didn't know where the line between those two ended. At the outpost, Rhodes strapped on his vest. "Gear up," he ordered. "We move in 10. Carter muttered curses but obeyed. Simmons checked his rifle, jaw tight. Others fell into line, weary but resolute. They weren't following orders. They weren't following mission. They were following Martinez. And for some reason, that felt more like purpose than anything else. Sarah paused at a stream, letting the civilians drink. She crouched, scanning the tree line, every nerve wired. The girl tugged at her sleeve, pointing. Sarah followed her finger and froze. Light. Torches. Voices. More enemy fighter, dozens this time, moving fast, sweeping the forest. Her chest locked. They were searching, hunting. She gripped the girl's shoulder, whispering, "Quiet, don't move." The civilians huddled low, pressing into the mud, clutching one another. Sarah raised the stolen rifle, breath steady, eyes cold. She had one chance, hold them off until. A crack split the night. But not her rifle. From the ridge behind, the sharp, clean echo of friendly fire. Bullets tore into the enemy line. Shouts, screams, chaos. Sarah blinked, stunned, then familiar voices. Covering fire. Push left. Her chest swelled. Rhodes, Simmons, the unit. They'd come. She fired too. syncing with their rhythm, weaving into the fight as though she'd never left. The forest erupted in thunder. Enemy fighters fell, scattered, broke. The survivors fled into the dark, leaving their dead behind. And then silence again. Her shoulders slumped. The civilians didn't move, still frozen in terror. Until Simmons called out, softer now, "It's all right, you're safe." Sarah turned to them, chest heaving, face streaked with mud. And slowly, like a tide breaking, the civilians began to rise. Later, as the soldiers guided the families back toward the outpost, Sarah walked at the rear. The girl held her hand still, doll dangling at her side. Rhodes fell in step beside her. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said. Her throat tightened, she didn't answer. "You endangered yourself, endangered civilians, endangered us." Her jaw set. But then he glanced at the girl, at the lines of weary faces trudging behind. And his voice softened. "And you saved them." Sarah blinked, unable to speak. The storm inside her quieted just a little. For the first time in weeks, her heart felt something like lightness. But deep in the valley, beyond the reach of their rifles, another convoy rolled. Bigger, stronger. Headed straight for them. The storm was not finished. Not yet. Why was the outpost so quiet, even with 100 lives crammed inside its rusted walls? Sarah sat against the sandbags, rifle balanced across her knees. Not her old rifle. That one was still locked in the armory, a punishment she hadn't yet earned release from. This was a borrowed weapon, heavier, unfamiliar, but her hands didn't shake anymore. Behind her, the civilians huddled in the storage bay they'd cleared, bundled in spare blankets, drinking from tin cups. The children barely whispered. The mothers watched everything with hollow eyes. The old men stared at the floor, silent as stone. It wasn't safety. It was pause, a fragile moment before the inevitable. And she knew it wouldn't last. Because deep inside her chest, she felt the storm building again. Rhodes moved like a man who hadn't slept in years. Maps spread across the table, radios hissing updates. His face drawn, eyes bloodshot, voice stripped down to commands. 2 convoys confirmed, Simmons reported, jaw set. 30, maybe 40 men, armored support. Rhodes nodded, ETA. 4 hours. The room stilled. 4 hours. That was all they had to turn a half-broken outpost into a fortress. All they had to ready themselves against a force that outnumbered them 3-1. Rhodes' eyes lifted, finding Sarah where she stood in the doorway. He held her gaze a long moment. She braced herself, for anger, for blame. But he only said, "Get to work." They dug in, reinforced the wire, stacked sandbags, laid extra rounds in the mud where hands could find them blind. Sarah worked alongside them without complaint. Sweat poured down her back, mud caked her boots, her arms ached. She didn't care. The weight was right. The ache was honest. Once Carter passed her with a box of ammo, their eyes met. His jaw tightened. "You should have left them," he muttered low. She didn't answer. Because the girl's handprint still lingered on her palm. Small, fragile, real. No argument could erase that. By dusk, the outpost felt like a wound pulled tight by rough stitches. Stronger, maybe, but ready to split. Sarah sat on the wall as the sun bled out behind the peaks. The civilians stirred restlessly behind her, the children coughing in the thin air. The girl appeared again, quiet as shadow, the same doll in her arms. She climbed onto the sandbag beside Sarah without a word. For a long while they just sat together, watching the mountains darken. Then the girl whispered, "Will we die?" Sarah's throat closed. She wanted to say no, she wanted to lie. But she had no lies left. So she said very softly, "Not tonight." The girl leaned against her arm, small and trembling, and Sarah felt for the first time that her calm heart wasn't just her burden, it was her gift. Night fell heavy. The first rumble of engines came just past midnight. Sarah's pulse quickened, her breath slowed. The storm had arrived. Engines, voices, the clatter of steel, shadows cresting the ridge. Headlights cut sharp beams into the valley. Rhodes' voice carried over the wall, "Hold steady." Sarah gripped her rifle, her cheek pressed to the stock. The scope filled her eye. The enemy spread wide, disciplined, not reckless like before. They knew they had numbers. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Rhodes' order cut through, "Not yet." Her chest tightened. The past pressed in, the night she hadn't waited, the shot she'd fired, the consequences she still carried. She swallowed hard. This time she would obey. The enemy closed, 50 yards, 40, 30. "Now," Rhodes said. The outpost erupted in fire. Muzzle flashes lit the walls. Bullets streaked the night, snapping sandbags, tearing metal. The roar of machine guns shook the valley. Sarah fired, calm and steady, each shot deliberate. One man fell, then another, then another. The enemy returned in kind, their rounds carving the air, sparking against steel. Shouts rose from the civilians' shelter, fear, prayers, children crying. She forced herself not to look back. Her world narrowed to the scope, to breath, to trigger. Until a blast rocked the ground. Mortar! The first shell struck the outer wire, fire and dirt flinging high. Men screamed. Another came closer. And another. Sarah's ears rang, the walls shook. She dropped behind cover, heart slamming. Her hands trembled, but not with fear, with rage. They would level the outpost, civilians and all. "Counter fire," Rhodes bellowed. Simmons swung the mounted gun toward the ridgeline, spraying tracer rounds. Carter scrambled to set up their single mortar, hands shaking. Sarah rose again, scanning through smoke, found the flash. Their enemy mortar crew, halfway down the slope. Her pulse slowed, her breath steadied. One shot. She squeezed. The round cracked through the storm. The crew scattered. One man fell, clutching his chest. Another shell fired, but veered wide, detonating harmlessly in the trees. Sarah chambered again, sighting the second man, fired. The enemy mortar went silent. She exhaled. But the storm did not end. The fight dragged on, minutes stretched into hours. The enemy pressed, wave after wave, bodies spilling against the wire. The unit held, bloodied, desperate, teeth grit. Sarah fired until her shoulder throbbed, until her cheekbone bruised, until her throat was raw from breathless gasps. At some point, Carter went down, shrapnel tearing across his leg. He screamed, cursing, blood soaking mud. Without thinking, Sarah dropped beside him, dragging him back behind cover as bullets tore the dirt around them. "Don't touch me," he snarled, pain twisting his face. But she ignored him. She wrapped a tourniquet, pulled it tight, met his eyes. "You'll live," she said. And for once, he didn't argue. Near dawn, the attack faltered. The enemy pulled back, dragging bodies, retreating into the fog. The valley fell silent, except for moans, coughs, and the crackle of burning debris. Sarah sat against the wall, rifle across her lap, hands numb. Her body shook with exhaustion, her eyes burned with smoke. But her heart was steady. She looked toward the civilian's shelter. The girl's eyes met hers across the yard. Alive, still alive. For now. But as Rhodes walked the wall, surveying the ruin, his expression was grim. He knew, as she did, that this was not the end. This was only the pause. The storm had broken over them, and the weight they carried had only grown heavier. Sarah felt it settle inside her like stone. And she knew one more choice was coming. One she couldn't escape. The sun rose weak over the mountains, but it brought no warmth. The outpost was shattered, smoke curled from the wire. The yard stank of blood, diesel, and cordite. Men limped, bandaged. The civilians huddled in corners, too drained even to weep. Sarah sat on the wall, rifle across her knees, eyes on the valley. The enemy wasn't finished. She knew it in her bones. Last night had been a probe, a test. The real strike was coming. And when it came, the outpost would not hold. Not with their numbers, not with their wounded, not with civilians chained to their survival. The girl's small hand slid into hers. She hadn't noticed her approach, hadn't heard her steps. "You look tired," the girl whispered. Sarah forced a faint smile. "I've been tired a long time." The child leaned against her. "But you're not scared." Sarah's chest tightened. If only the girl knew. By noon, Rhodes had the truth. The radio crackled, voices urgent, intercepted chatter, reports from scouts. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were regrouping, reinforced, heavily armed. "They'll hit us tonight," Simmons said flatly. Rhodes' jaw clenched. He looked around the room, his officers, his soldiers, the civilians pressed against the walls. He looked at Carter, leg bound in bloodied cloth. At Sarah, standing silent in the corner. And for the first time, his mask cracked. "They'll overrun us." The words dropped like stones into water. The room went still. No one argued, because they all knew it was true. That evening, Sarah sat with her rifle, staring at the mountains. The weight pressed harder than ever. All her life she'd carried it alone. Her silence, her storm, her burden. She had thought it a curse. But now, as the valley darkened, she saw it clearly. It was also her gift. Not fearlessness, not recklessness, but calm. The calm to stand when others broke. The calm to act when others froze. The calm to carry so that others might live. And in that calm, she knew what had to be done. She found Rhodes at the wall, staring through binoculars at the enemy campfires flickering on the ridge. "They're building for a push," he muttered. Sarah's voice was steady. "You can't hold them here." He didn't answer. "You know it," she pressed. "This outpost is a trap, it'll break." His shoulders sagged just slightly. "So what's your plan, Martinez? You seem to think you've got all the answers." Her jaw tightened. Not answers, just one choice. She gestured toward the civilians, toward the girl. "Get them out, take the wounded, move before dawn." Rhodes turned, eyes sharp. "And leave this place wide open. Let them roll through unchallenged." "They're not after the outpost," Sarah said. "They're after you, after every soul inside." She set her rifle down between them. "I'll stay, I'll hold them, long enough for you to get clear." The silence stretched. Rhodes stared at her like she'd gone mad. "You think you can hold a battalion by yourself?" "No," Sarah said softly, "but I can make them believe they're walking into hell, long enough to buy you time." His fists clenched. "You disobeyed me once, you cost lives, and now you want me to bless this suicide." Her eyes lifted to his. "This isn't about me, or you, it's about them." She nodded toward the civilians. Rhodes followed her gaze. The girl's small face watched from the shadows, clutching her doll. His jaw worked, his eyes closed. When he opened them again, they glistened. "God damn you," he whispered. The evacuation began before dawn. Men carried the wounded on stretchers. Civilians moved in hushed silence, guided by Simmons and Carter. Supplies stripped down to bare essentials. Sarah stood apart, tightening her gear, loading her rifle, counting rounds. The girl ran to her, eyes wide, breath hitching. "You're coming too," she pleaded. Sarah knelt, cupping the child's cheek. "No," she said gently, "I can't." Tears welled in the girl's eyes. "But why?" "Because someone has to stay," Sarah whispered. "Someone has to make sure you get away." She pressed something into the girl's hands. Her dog tags. The metal clinked softly. "When you're safe, when you're older, tell them I was here. Tell them we fought. Tell them you lived." The girl sobbed, clinging to her. Sarah held her tight, heart breaking, then gently pushed her back. Go, she said, be brave. The last convoy rolled out as dawn broke, engines muffled, wheels grinding against rock. Rhodes was the last to leave, pausing at the gate. His eyes found Sarah's. He gave a short, sharp nod, half salute, half farewell. She returned it. Then he was gone, and the outpost was silent again. The enemy came at midday. Engines rumbling, boots pounding, a tide of men pouring down the slopes. Sarah lay prone on the wall, rifle sighted, heart steady. One breath in, one breath out. The storm was inside her again, but now it was hers to command. She fired, one man dropped, another. The enemy faltered, surprised by the ferocity from a seemingly empty outpost. She shifted, fired again, making her shots ring from different corners, weaving the illusion of a full garrison. Mortars answered, shells pounding the yard, the walls shook, dust choked her lungs. But she did not move. Shot after shot her calm held. She became the storm. Hours dragged into an eternity of fire and smoke. Her shoulder bled from shrapnel, her hands blistered, her breath rasped. Still she fought. Every shot a message, you will not pass, not yet. And for a time they believed her. Until the breach came. Explosives tore the gate, steel buckled, men poured through, shouting, guns blazing. Sarah staggered back, rifle empty. She drew her sidearm, firing until the slide locked back. Then she stood, bloodied, broken, but unyielding. For one heartbeat, the enemy froze. Because in her eyes they saw no fear, only calm. The calm of a soldier who had already chosen. The calm of a storm about to break. The last blast took the outpost with her. Far away, as the convoy wound through the mountains, the ground trembled. A plume of smoke rose against the dawn. The girl clutched Sarah's dog tags in her fists, tears streaming down her cheeks. She stayed, she whispered. Simmons turned away, jaw tight. Carter bowed his head. Rhodes kept his eyes forward, face carved from stone. But in his silence a truth burned. She had saved them all. Years later, they would tell the story. Of the lone sniper who held an outpost against an army. Of the calm in her heart, stronger than fear, stronger than fire. Of the storm she carried, and how she gave it so others could live. They would speak her name with reverence. Sarah Martinez. Soldier, sniper, legend.